She threw me out onto the street the day after my son's funeral. Just one day after we buried Michael, Victoria, also known as Tori, stood in the doorway of the house with her arms crossed. Her voice was cold and flat. "This house belongs to me now, Lauren. You should leave." I stood there, still holding the bouquet of funeral flowers that remained in my hands, trying to understand what was happening. Michael, my only son, had just been laid to rest, and now the woman he once loved was pushing me out of the place where I had lived for the past 2 years as part of their family. Only a few weeks later, during the official reading of the will at the lawyer's office, Tori sat there with a smirk on her lips. When attorney Robert Harlan opened the sealed envelope, she looked straight into my eyes and said, "I hope you enjoy living like a wanderer, Lauren Smith." Her words echoed through the silent room like a final knife. I sat there, 68 years old. I had been a widow for many years. Now I had lost my son as well, and it seemed that I had also lost the last home I had left. But then the lawyer cleared his throat, and everything began to change. If you are watching this video, please press like if you enjoy stories about karma, the kind where life quietly arranges things so that everything eventually returns to its rightful place. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. And leave a comment below to tell me where you are watching from: California, Texas, Florida, or maybe a small town somewhere in the Midwest. Your voices truly mean a lot to me. And now let me tell you the whole story from the beginning. Because sometimes justice does not need you to take action. It simply waits in silence, and at the right moment, the truth reveals itself. My name is Lauren Smith. I am 68 years old. I used to be a high school teacher in the suburbs of Maplewood, Illinois. It is a typical American town where people greet each other in the morning and neighbors still bring homemade pie to your door when something sad happens. Michael was everything I had after my husband passed away more than 10 years ago. He was 47 years old. He worked at a local bank. He was healthy, cheerful, and always the kind of son who made me proud. Tori was his wife, a beautiful and capable woman. But for a long time I had felt a distance between us. Michael was always the bridge between us. And when he was gone, that bridge collapsed. Everything began with a phone call at 3:17 in the morning on a Tuesday. The phone rang in the middle of the night. Michael's voice was breathless and broken. "Mom, something is wrong. My chest. I cannot breathe." The line went dead before I could ask another question. I rushed out of the house in panic and drove through the empty streets of Maplewood toward the nearest hospital. When I arrived, the doctor was already waiting with a calm and professional expression. A severe heart attack. They could not save him. Michael, my son, the healthy man I had seen jogging every morning, was gone forever. I stood in the sterile waiting room, my hands trembling, trying to breathe. Tori stood beside me. Her face wore a perfect mask of grief, but for a brief moment I saw something in her eyes. A flicker of relief. Very quick, very subtle. I told myself it must be my imagination born from pain and shock. "How could that possibly be true?" I whispered quietly. "What will happen now?" I still could not accept that Michael was truly gone, and then everything began to change. I still remember that night as if it were carved into my memory, that fateful Tuesday night. The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. The sound cut through the dark room and made my heart jump. I reached over and turned on the lamp. On the screen I saw the name Michael. My son never called at this hour unless something was seriously wrong. I answered the phone, my voice still heavy with sleep. "Michael, what is it, son?" On the other end of the line, I heard broken, desperate breathing. It sounded as if he was struggling to hold on to each breath. "Mom, something is wrong. My chest. I cannot breathe." Then there was only the cold sound of the line going dead. Beep, beep, beep. The call had ended. I do not remember what I was wearing. I only remember jumping out of bed and rushing down the stairs. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped my car keys. I drove through the empty streets of Maplewood. The pale yellow streetlights reflected on the wet pavement after the night rain. My heart was pounding. My mind raced with the worst possible thoughts. "It is probably just stomach pain," I told myself. Maybe he had an allergic reaction. Michael is healthy. He runs every morning. He eats well. It cannot be something serious. It had to be something small. It had to be... When I rushed into the emergency room of the suburban hospital, the smell of disinfectant filled the air. A nurse led me down a long hallway. Then a doctor stepped forward. He was a middle-aged man with glasses. His voice was calm and flat, like someone reading a report. "You are the mother of Michael Thompson, correct?" I nodded. "I am very sorry," he said quietly. "He suffered a severe heart attack. We did everything we could, but we could not save him. He has passed away." I stood there in silence. The words "passed away" sounded so gentle, almost too gentle, as if Michael had simply stepped out of the room for a moment. I looked at the doctor, waiting for him to say something else, some explanation, some tiny piece of hope. But he only lowered his head and said softly, "You may go see him now." Tori was already there when I entered the room. She stood beside the hospital bed, holding Michael's arm. Her face was wet with tears. I walked forward and slowly knelt beside my son. He lay there with his eyes closed. His face looked strangely peaceful, as if he were only sleeping. I touched his hand. It was still warm, but there was no life in it. I whispered softly, "Michael, it is Mom. Please do not leave." Tori did not say much. She cried quietly, soft and restrained sobs. But when I looked up at her, the fluorescent light above us shone directly into her eyes. And for just a brief moment, I saw something there. A flash. Very quick. Very subtle. It was not grief. It looked like relief. Like someone who had just put down a heavy burden. I blinked, wondering if I was imagining things in the middle of shock. How could that possibly be true? She was Michael's wife. She loved him. But in that moment, a small seed of doubt had already been planted. Even though I tried to ignore it, I sat beside my son's bed, holding his hand tightly as tears kept falling. I whispered to myself, my voice trembling, "What will happen now, Michael? How am I supposed to live without you?" The doctor returned a few minutes later. He spoke gently, saying they needed to prepare the paperwork. He said the family should begin thinking about the funeral arrangements. Tori nodded. She wiped her tears and looked at me with an expression that at the time I believed was shared grief. But looking back now, I realized something else. That may have been the first mask. I did not know then that from that moment on, everything would change forever. The bridge between Tori and me had been Michael, and that bridge had just collapsed. Across the dark space that remained a completely different person was waiting to reveal herself. This story is far from over. Stay with me, because what happened next would make me realize that sometimes justice arrives in a way no one expects. The days that followed passed like a blurred nightmare. I could barely sleep. I often sat at the kitchen table in my small home. It was the same home I had sold 2 years earlier to help Michael and Tori pay the down payment for a larger house in Maplewood. I sat there staring at old photographs of my son. Every time I thought about arranging Michael's funeral, my chest tightened. He was my only child. He was everything I had left after his father passed away. I could not let Tori carry all of that alone. The morning after Michael died, I called Tori from the hospital. My voice trembled. "Tori, dear, let me take care of the funeral expenses. Michael was my only son. I want to do something for him. I can pay for everything." I heard a quiet sigh on the other end of the line. Then Tori spoke in a strangely calm voice. "Thank you, Mom. But that will not be necessary. I am his wife. I know what Michael wanted. He always talked to me about the things he liked. The music, the flowers, everything. I will take care of it." The refusal was not harsh, but it was as clear as a door closing firmly in front of me. I stayed silent for a moment. Then I could only say, "All right. If you need anything, just let me know." She ended the call without another word. I did not want to argue, not at that moment. I only wanted to do something meaningful for Michael. So I sat down at my computer and began to write a eulogy. My hands trembled as I typed each line. Michael Thompson, my beloved son, a devoted husband, a loyal friend. He lived a full life. He always smiled. He was always ready to help others. I wrote the words again and again. Tears fell onto the keyboard. I erased lines and wrote them again until the words truly came from my heart. It was the only way I knew how to say goodbye to my son. I also called my sister Susan in Phoenix. She flew in immediately. It was a long flight, but she arrived in time. When she walked into my house and wrapped her arms around me, she whispered softly, "Little sister, I am here now. We will get through this." At that moment, Susan was the only person who made me feel that I was not completely alone. She helped me prepare clothes for the funeral. She reminded me to eat, and she listened while I talked about Michael without judgment. But Tori was different. She controlled everything completely. From choosing the flowers, pure white lilies that Michael once said he liked, to the guest list, to the hymn that would be played in the church. Every time I offered to help, Tori would smile politely and say, "Mom, please let me handle it. You should rest." I know what Michael wanted. Her words sounded warm, but her eyes were cold. I could clearly feel the growing distance between us. There were no more Christmas hugs, no more friendly phone calls, only quiet control. I told myself hundreds of times, everyone grieves differently. Some people cry loudly. Some people withdraw into themselves. Tori must belong to the second group. She is trying to stay strong for Michael. I repeated those words like a prayer, trying to convince myself that her coldness was only her way of dealing with pain. I did not want to think badly of my daughter-in-law. She was the woman Michael had chosen to spend his life with. But deep inside, a quiet sense of unease began to grow. Every time Tori refused my help, every time she said the words, "I am his wife," like a wall between us, I felt as if I was being pushed to the edge of the family. I tried to push those thoughts away. At that time, I only wanted to focus on saying goodbye to Michael. The funeral was approaching, and I knew that day would force me to face the harshest truth of all. My son was gone, and perhaps the family I once believed I belonged to was also beginning to break apart piece by piece. What I did not know then was that those days of preparing for the funeral were only the beginning. The first cracks had already appeared, and they would grow deeper and deeper, leading to a truth I had never imagined. The night before the funeral, I could not sleep. The house that belonged to Michael and Tori felt strangely silent. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, as if it were counting down the final hours of my son's life in this world. Tori had told me I could stay that night, but it was not out of kindness. I could feel that clearly. She only wanted to keep appearances in front of the neighbors. I wandered through the familiar hallway. My feet seemed to pull me toward Michael's old room, the room where he had grown up, the room where I had lived for the past 2 years as part of their family. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room still carried the faint smell of pine wood and a trace of Michael's cologne. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer of the dresser. The familiar photographs were still there. Michael, on the day he graduated from college, smiling brightly with his diploma in his hands. A wedding photograph of him and Tori, both dressed in pure white under the warm Illinois sunlight. A photograph from last Christmas. Michael was holding Tori's young nephew in his arms, laughing beside a sparkling Christmas tree. Everything seemed unchanged. But then I realized something was wrong. I turned over each frame one by one. My heart began to beat faster. There was not a single photograph of Michael and me from the recent years. Not the picture from my 65th birthday that he had taken. Not the photo of us standing together during the 25th anniversary celebration of my marriage with his father. Not even the photograph of the two of us walking through Maplewood Park just 3 years ago. All of those photographs were gone. I sat there in silence, my hands turning cold. Tori had quietly removed them. She had erased me from my own son's life. One photograph at a time, one memory at a time, without a single word. A cold wave of violation rose inside me. This was no longer Michael's house. This was Tori's territory. And I was only an unwanted guest she was preparing to send away. The suspicion I had tried to bury since the day Michael died now rose stronger than ever. Why? Why would she do this? Did Michael know? Or had he left this world without knowing that his wife was quietly erasing every trace of his mother? I was sitting there, silent tears falling onto Michael's graduation photograph, when I heard a soft knock at the door. I looked up. Tori stood in the doorway. Her figure was framed by the dim hallway light. The mask of grief was gone. In its place was a calculating, cold expression, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "We need to talk, Lauren." Her voice was calm, but every word sounded like a declaration. There was no mom anymore, only Lauren. And in that moment I understood more clearly than ever. The bridge between Tori and me had been Michael, and that bridge had completely collapsed. There was nothing left holding us together, only a deep and endless abyss, and I was standing alone on this side of it. I did not know that in only a few hours that abyss would truly swallow me, but in that moment I could only look at Tori and whisper silently in my heart, "Michael, my son, I need you so much." The day of the funeral arrived, and I still could not believe that I was standing there. I stood inside the small, familiar church in Maplewood, the same church where Michael once sang in the high school choir. Everything was beautiful, perfectly beautiful, almost too perfect. White lilies were arranged everywhere. Large, pure bouquets filled the air with a gentle fragrance. The hymns began to play, the very songs Michael loved most. Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art. Every note felt like it was cutting into my heart. Tori had arranged everything carefully. The printed programs showed Michael's bright smile. The reception table after the service held sandwiches, fruit salad, and hot coffee. Everything was exactly what one would expect at a traditional American funeral, warm but respectful. Neighbors, friends, and Michael's co-workers came in large numbers. Everyone hugged me. They whispered sincere words of sympathy. Clara Donovan, our next-door neighbor, held my hand longer than the others. "Lauren," she whispered gently, "if you need a place to stay for a while, you can come to my house." I could only nod as tears filled my eyes again. But in the middle of all that warmth, Tori stood at the center of attention. She wore a long, elegant black dress. Her hair was tied neatly in a high bun. Her makeup was light, yet her face showed a perfect expression of sorrow. She stood in the front row, accepting condolences with careful hugs, a trembling voice at the right moment, and tears that fell exactly when people expected them to. People kept whispering around me, "She is so strong. Tori is amazing for organizing everything." I stood a few steps away watching her performance, because by then that was what I had begun to call it, a performance. Each time someone asked how she was doing, Tori would smile sadly and say, "I am trying to move forward." Michael would want me to begin a new chapter, wouldn't he? She repeated those words again and again. Soft words, but sharp, like a quiet reminder that life must move on. Without me. I tried to remain calm. I stood in the line, receiving condolences, and nodded in thanks. My sister Susan stood beside me, squeezing my hand whenever my body began to tremble. Then, while people were slowly moving toward the reception area, I accidentally walked past a large cluster of flowers in the corner of the room. I stopped. I heard Tori's voice, low, quiet, but clear. She was speaking to her brother, Brandon. Brandon stood close beside her in a black suit, holding a cup of coffee. He listened with a knowing expression. "Just the insurance money alone can cover the mortgage for 2 years, Tori said softly but firmly. "And now there will be no extra expenses anymore. No more unnecessary costs." Brandon asked quietly, "What about Lauren? Where will she go?" Tori laughed, a sharp, crisp laugh. Without hesitation, "That is no longer my problem," she said. "She can take care of herself like any other adult." My blood seemed to freeze. I stood behind the flowers, gripping the back of a chair so tightly that my fingers turned white. I barely dared to breathe, afraid they would notice me. 2 years earlier, I had sold my small house, the home where my husband and I had lived for 40 years. I gave them $50,000 as the down payment for this house. Michael insisted it was only temporary. He said I would find a smaller place later, something easier to manage in my old age. But temporary turned into 2 years. I cooked, I cleaned, I took care of the garden. I became part of that house, and now Tori called me an extra expense. Something unnecessary. It felt like a slap across my face, right in front of my son's memory. I stepped back and turned away before they could see me. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks, but I did not cry out loud. I did not want Tori to see me weak. I quietly stood in the corner of the room, watching her continue playing the role of the perfect widow. She smiled and spoke with everyone as if nothing had happened. Brandon patted her shoulder and whispered something. They both smiled. A quiet smile, as if everything had already been calculated. At that moment, I finally understood something. This funeral was not about saying goodbye to Michael. For Tori, it was the closing of an old chapter, the chapter that still included me, and the beginning of a new one. a chapter where there was no place for a mother-in-law. My blood grew cold, but instead of collapsing, a small flame began to burn inside me. Not blind anger, but cold clarity. I whispered quietly inside my heart, "Michael, my son, I will not let this end like this." That day ended as the sun set behind the bright red maple trees of Maplewood. Everyone went home, leaving me with my grief. And with a new determination. What I did not know then was that in only a few hours, Tori would officially throw me out of the house. And everything would change forever. Stay with me. Because what happened after the funeral was the moment when the mask truly fell. After the funeral, when everyone had gone home, the house became unbearably quiet. The white lilies were still fresh, but their fragrance now only made my chest tighten. I was standing in the living room holding a handkerchief soaked with tears when Tori appeared beside me. She was still wearing the same elegant black dress, but the polite social smile was completely gone. "Lauren," she said softly but firmly, "could you help me in the kitchen for a moment? There are a few things we need to discuss." I nodded, though a bad feeling had already begun to rise inside me. I followed her past the few remaining relatives who were quietly cleaning up. I waved goodbye to my sister Susan, who would be flying back to Phoenix the next morning. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Call me anytime, little sister." I could only nod, trying to hold back my tears. When we reached the kitchen, Tori closed the door. The dry click of the latch sounded like a final declaration. She turned to face me and crossed her arms. There was no trace of sadness left on her face. Her eyes were sharp and calculating. It was as if the mask of the grieving widow had been completely thrown away. "I will be direct," Tori began, her voice calm in a way that sent a chill through me. "This house was in Michael's name. That means it now belongs to me. I need time and space to deal with my grief without any complications." My heart skipped. "Complications," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my throat felt dry. "You staying here is no longer appropriate, Lauren. I need privacy." The words struck me like a punch to the chest. I stepped back and grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter to keep my balance. "Tori, I understand that you are grieving, but surely we can get through this together. I only want to stay for a little while until I find another place." Michael would not want no. She raised her hand to stop me. Her voice was firm. "I have already decided. You have until tomorrow evening to pack your things. That should be enough time." I stared at her, searching for even the smallest trace of the woman who once called me Mom during warm Christmas dinners. The woman who hugged me tightly when Michael proposed to her. The woman who cried with joy when I moved in to live with them. But that woman was gone. In her place stood a completely different Tori. Cold, calculating, without hesitation. "Tori, where do you expect me to go?" My voice trembled, almost begging. "I sold my house to help you and Michael buy this one. I do not have anywhere else to go." She shrugged. The gesture was calm, almost cruel. "You are an adult, Lauren. You will figure something out." The harsh truth stole the air from my lungs. I thought about Michael, my son, the man who always protected me, the man who once said, "Mom, I will never let you struggle." I knew he would be horrified if he could hear this conversation. "Michael would never accept this," I whispered, my voice breaking. "He would be horrified to know you are doing this to his mother." Tori looked directly into my eyes without blinking. "Michael is dead." The words came out dry and sharp, like a final blow. "And the sooner you accept that, the better it will be for both of us." I stood there in silence. It felt as if the entire world had collapsed beneath my feet. There were no words left, nothing left to hold on to. Tori turned away, opened the kitchen door, and walked out. She left me alone in the room where I had once cooked family dinners. The same kitchen where Michael once hugged me and said, "Thank you for everything, Mom." I did not cry at that moment. My tears were already gone. Only a deep, numbing pain remained, and a quiet determination. I would not let Tori see me break. Not tonight. I returned to Michael's old room. I sat on the bed and looked around at the walls, now stripped of every personal trace of me. I knew that from this moment on, I was no longer part of this house. And perhaps in Tori's eyes, I had never truly been part of it at all. But what I did not yet know was this. Michael, my son, had seen everything long before this moment, and he had prepared one final gift, a gift that would change everything. The next morning I woke up feeling as if all the strength had been drained from my body. I had barely slept the night before. I had simply lain there staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock, as if it were counting the final seconds of my time in this house. I knew I had to start packing, but my arms and legs felt heavy, as if every movement reminded me that this was the last time I would ever be here. I opened my suitcase and began folding my clothes. The sweaters Michael had given me for my birthday, my late husband's old scarf, a few photographs that Tori had not yet removed, 68 years of my life, from my childhood in rural Illinois, to my years as a teacher, to raising Michael alone after my husband passed away, and finally the 2 years I had spent living with my son and my daughter-in-law. Now everything fit into 4 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes. I wrapped each item carefully, as if I were wrapping pieces of memory, hoping they would not shatter when they left this place. All day long I kept waiting. I waited for Tori to come upstairs. I waited for her to knock on the door. I imagined she would say she had spoken in anger because of her grief. I imagined she would say, of course I could stay a few more weeks, maybe even a few months, until I found another place to live. In my mind, I saw her hugging me and apologizing the way families sometimes do in moments of sorrow. I waited and waited, but she never appeared. I only heard her footsteps downstairs, the sound of her phone ringing, a quiet laugh while she spoke with someone. Everything sounded normal, as if forcing her mother-in-law out of the house were nothing important. At exactly 6 in the evening, Tori appeared in the doorway. Her arms were crossed, her posture was straight, her voice was cold. "Time is up, Lauren." I closed the zipper on the last suitcase and looked around the room. It was empty now. The walls that once held family photographs and the drawing Michael made when he was a child now showed only small nail marks and the faint smell of old paint. The room had returned to being a guest room again. Perhaps it had never truly been mine. "I just need a few more minutes to carry everything to the car," I said quietly. "I will help," Tori replied. It was not kindness. It was an order. She wanted to make sure I left quickly without leaving a single trace behind. We made 3 trips in complete silence. I carried the suitcases. She carried the cardboard boxes. Not a word, not a glance. Each time I stepped through the front door, my chest tightened. When the final trip was finished, I closed the trunk of my car and turned back to look at the house. The house where I had poured my sweat, my tears, and $50,000 of my savings so they could buy it. I took a deep breath and tried to say one last goodbye. Perhaps I was hoping to see if any trace of humanity remained in her. "Tori, I know you are angry with me for some reason," I said softly, my voice trembling. "I wish I knew what I did wrong so I could try to fix it." Tori's expression did not soften. She looked at me with cold eyes. "You did nothing wrong, Lauren," she said calmly. "You simply exist, in my space, in my life, and you are in my way. Michael felt sorry for you. I do not." The words felt like the final knife. There was no anger in them, no shouting, just a clean and cruel truth. I had nothing left to say. I nodded slightly, got into the car, and started the engine. As the car began to move, I rolled down the window and looked back one last time. Tori was still standing in the driveway, her arms crossed, watching my old car. She did not wave. She did not bow her head. There was not a single trace of regret on her face. She simply stood there until my car disappeared around the corner. I drove through my tears. I did not dare look in the rearview mirror for too long, afraid I might turn back. I drove toward a cheap motel near the main highway. A typical American Hampton Inn with a flickering neon sign and a parking lot full of trucks. I rented a room for 1 week. I carried my suitcases up to the 2nd floor and opened the door to a plain room filled with the strong smell of cleaning chemicals. I sat on the edge of the stiff polyester bed and looked at my reflection in the wall mirror. Who was that woman, a 68-year-old widow who had now lost her son, homeless, and seemingly worthless in the eyes of the only family she had left? I covered my face and cried silently. The loneliness was overwhelming. It was not only the loss of a home, It felt like the loss of the meaning of my life. But in the middle of that pain, something small began to flicker. It was not clear hope, more like a sharp feeling, almost like waiting. Tori believed she had won. She believed she had successfully thrown away her troublesome mother-in-law and taken everything for herself. But I knew Michael. My son was better than that. He had always been thoughtful. He had always cared for his mother. And I had a quiet feeling that even though he was gone, he had not left his mother completely alone. I wiped my tears and looked out the motel window at the highway lights flashing in the distance. That night I fell asleep with my pain still heavy in my heart, but also with a quiet determination. I would keep living, if only to prove that Michael had taught me something true. The love of a mother is not defeated easily. And I had no idea that in just 2 weeks a phone call from a lawyer would change everything. 2 weeks passed in that cheap motel like a long, heavy pause, a place where time seemed to slow down so pain would have more room to gnaw at me. I lived with brutal frugality. I ate only the cheapest food from the nearby convenience store. I turned the lights off early to save electricity. I tried not to turn on the air conditioner even though the Illinois summer was suffocatingly hot. Every morning when I woke up, I checked my bank account on my old phone. The balance shrank a little more each day. My Social Security check and the small pension from my years teaching at Maplewood Public School were only enough to cover the basics. The motel room, gas for the car, a few simple meals. I knew that if I did not find a new place to live soon, everything would run out. I spent hours sitting at the worn wooden table in the room. I opened my laptop, the computer Michael had given me for my 65th birthday, and searched through websites for senior apartments. Senior living communities in the suburbs of Chicago appeared on the screen with beautiful images. 1-bedroom apartments, small gardens, shared meals, activities for older residents. I calculated every number carefully. The first month of rent, the security deposit, application fees, moving costs. Everything was beyond what I could afford unless some new source of money appeared. Sometimes I whispered to myself almost in disbelief. "Lauren, how are you going to live like this? 68 years old, no home, no son, no one beside you." The feeling of worthlessness crept in every night. I lay on the stiff polyester mattress, listening to trucks roaring along the highway outside, and I wondered if Michael could see his mother struggling like this. I tried to stay in touch with my sister Susan by phone, but she lived far away in Phoenix and I did not want to make her worry even more. So I only told her simple things. "I am fine. Do not worry about me." But the truth was, I was not fine at all. Every time I looked out the motel window and saw cars passing by, I remembered Tori's silver BMW, the car Michael had bought for her on their wedding anniversary. And I wondered how she was living now in the house that I had once helped build. Then one afternoon, while I was sitting at the table reviewing my spending notes on a sheet of scrap paper, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code was local. I answered, my voice slightly trembling. "Hello, is this Mrs. Lauren Smith? This is Robert Harlan from the law office of Morrison and Harlan. I am the attorney handling the legal matters of Michael Thompson." I sat up straight. The motel chair creaked under me. "Yes. This is Lauren." "What is it, sir?" Mr. Harlan spoke, in a calm, professional voice, but there was warmth in it. The kind of American lawyer I had seen during school meetings with parents. "Mrs. Fairfield." "I apologize, Mrs. Smith. The probate process for Michael's will has been completed. We will hold the official reading of the will next Tuesday at 2:00 in the afternoon at my office. Your presence is required because the will clearly states that you are one of the beneficiaries." I was silent for a few seconds, trying to understand what he had just said. A beneficiary. But Tori said the house was in Michael's name and everything belonged to her. "I did not think," Mr. Harlan interrupted gently. "I can only tell you what the will states, Mrs. Smith, and the will clearly lists your name as a beneficiary. I will see you next Tuesday at 2:00 in the afternoon. If you need directions, I can send them to you by email." After the call ended, I sat there frozen, staring at the phone in my hand. My heart was beating fast, not from fear, but from a small and unexpected spark of hope that slipped quietly into my chest. Michael had left something for me. I imagined it might only be a small keepsake. Perhaps his father's pocket watch that Michael used to wear. or the childhood photo album he kept inside the family safe. Even something small like that would mean so much to me. Tori would not be pleased, but she would have to accept it, because it was Michael's final wish. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the highway lights flickered in the fading sunset. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt a little bit of light. Not because of money, I did not dare hope for that yet, but because I knew my son was still taking care of his mother, even if it was from far away. Michael had never left his mother alone, and perhaps even now he still had not. I smiled through my tears and whispered softly to myself, "Thank you, Michael. I will be there." And I had no idea that the reading of that will would open a secret far greater than anything I had imagined. That Tuesday arrived faster than I expected. I woke up early in the motel room. I put on a simple navy blue dress, the only outfit I still had that looked clean and formal. I applied a little makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. I looked at myself in the mirror and quietly told myself, "Lauren, just stay calm. This is only a legal meeting. Michael probably left you a few keepsakes." I drove to the law office of Robert Harlan in downtown Maplewood. My heart pounded the entire way. I arrived about 15 minutes early and parked in the small lot behind the classic red brick building. As soon as I stepped out of the car, a shiny silver BMW glided into the parking lot. It was the same car Michael had bought for Tori on their wedding anniversary. Tori stepped out. She wore an expensive black dress that hugged her figure. Her hair was neatly tied in a high bun and large sunglasses covered half her face. Beside her was Brandon, Tori's younger brother. He wore an elegant gray suit and carried a leather briefcase. He kept checking his phone constantly, as if he were handling an important business deal. They walked straight into the building without looking around. I took a deep breath and followed them. The reception area was spacious, and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. A young receptionist smiled and greeted me. "Are you here for the will reading of Mr. Michael Thompson, ma'am? Please have a seat for a moment." Before I could even sit down on the leather chair, Tori suddenly turned when she noticed me. Her face darkened. She pushed her sunglasses up onto her head and walked quickly to the reception desk. Her voice rose sharply. "What is she doing here?" The receptionist maintained her professional tone. "Mrs. Lauren Smith is here for the will reading, ma'am." "Which Mrs.?" Fairfield Tori pressed her voice slightly higher, her eyes flicking toward me with open contempt. "Both of you, ma'am," the receptionist replied calmly. Brandon leaned close to Tori and whispered something in her ear, perhaps telling her to stay calm. Tori gave a short nod and sat down in a chair across the waiting area as far from me as possible. The air felt tight like a stretched wire. I sat there with my hands tightly clasped together, trying not to look at her. I could hear Tori sighing impatiently. Her high heels tapped rhythmically against the wooden floor. Exactly at 2 o'clock, Robert Harlan appeared. He was a man around 60 years old with silver hair and thin wire-frame glasses. His face looked kind but serious. The kind of lawyer Americans trust when they need help with a will or a home purchase. He gave me a small smile, nodded politely to Tori and Brandon, and then led the three of us into his private office. He sat behind a large mahogany desk and opened a file. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand this is a difficult time." Michael was very clear about his wishes. "I will read the entire will, and afterward we can discuss any questions." He began reading the main section. Tori sat upright, her hands clasped tightly. Her eyes brightened as she heard each item listed. The house in Maplewood valued at about $600,000, 2 vehicles, a retirement account, and a life insurance policy worth $250,000. All of it belonged to her. Each time Mr. Harlan finished reading an item, Tori nodded with satisfaction. Occasionally she glanced at me with a subtle look of triumph. Brandon carefully wrote notes in a small notebook. I sat quietly, not surprised. That was exactly what I had expected. I was simply waiting for the small thing Michael might have left for his mother. Perhaps his father's silver watch, or the childhood photo album he kept in the family safe. Then Mr. Harlan's voice changed slightly. It became slower. "However, there is an additional clause that Michael added 3 months ago on February 15th. He came to my office personally to arrange this." The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew heavy. Tori stopped nodding. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Brandon lowered his pen. I held my breath. Mr. Harlan continued reading. To my mother, Lauren Smith, who provided $50,000 for the down payment on our house and never once asked to be repaid, I leave the entire contents of safety deposit box. Number 3537 at First National Bank along, with all related documents and account information. What safety deposit box? Tori burst out. Her voice was shrill, almost a shout. Michael never mentioned any safety deposit box. Mr. Harlan looked up from the document and spoke calmly. It appears that was something he kept private. He was very clear that the contents should belong to his mother. I was just as surprised. My heart began pounding again. Michael had never told me anything about a safety deposit box. I assumed it probably contained a few personal belongings, but the look on Tori's face, now red with anger, made me realize something. She was afraid. Brandon spoke next, his voice low. If there is anything valuable in that box, it should be considered part of the estate. We can challenge that. Mr. Harlan smiled slightly. You are welcome to try. But the clause is very clear. Michael was fully competent when he added it. I personally witnessed and signed the document. Tori jumped to her feet. Her chair scraped sharply across the floor. This is ridiculous. We will file a legal objection tomorrow. Brandon grabbed her arm and whispered quickly. Tori, calm down. Let me review everything first. She sat down again, but her face remained flushed with anger. Her eyes were locked on me as if they could drill straight through me. Mr. Harlan pulled out a sealed envelope and handed it to me. Mrs. Smith, these are the bank documents and Michael's personal key. The bank will need to verify the death certificate and process the paperwork. That usually takes about 3 business days. He requested that you access the box within the next few days. I took the envelope. My hands trembled slightly. Tori stared at it like a hawk watching its prey. The tension in the room was so thick that I could almost hear the ticking of a clock. I did not say much. I simply nodded to thank Mr. Harlan stood up and left the office. As I walked past Tori, I could feel her eyes drilling into my back. Brandon whispered something to her, but Tori only shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. When I reached the parking lot, I sat inside my car, still gripping the envelope. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt a real ray of light. Not because of money, but because I knew that Michael had thought about his mother. He had protected her, even knowing what Tori might do after he was gone. I started the car and whispered softly to myself, "Thank you, Michael. I will open that safety deposit box, and whatever is inside, I will not disappoint you." What I did not know was that the contents of that box would be far greater than anything I had imagined, and it would force Tori to face the truth about who she really was. 3 working days after the will reading passed intense anticipation. I stayed in the motel, eating simple meals and trying not to think too much about the sealed envelope that Mr. Harlan had given me. Every night I placed it under my pillow as if touching it could somehow bring back a little of Michael's warmth. Tori called twice. Her voice sounded artificially sweet. She asked whether Mom was doing all right and casually suggested that she could come with me to the bank to help. I declined politely. "Thank you, but I can handle it myself." She stayed silent for a few seconds, then hung up without saying goodbye. I knew she was worried, and that only made me more determined to keep everything secret. On the scheduled day, I arrived at First National Bank in downtown Maplewood. The manager, Margaret Hayes, was already waiting at the counter. She was a woman around 55 years old, with silver hair tied neatly into a bun and reading glasses resting low on her nose. She gave me a warm smile, offered her condolences, and then guided me through a secure hallway filled with steel doors and security cameras. "We have been informed about the situation, Mrs. Smith," she said gently. "I am very sorry about your son. Please follow me, Mrs." Hayes used the master key while I inserted Michael's personal key into the lock. Safety deposit box number 3537 slid out. It was larger than I expected, about the size of a small travel briefcase, and it was surprisingly heavy when she placed it on the table. "Your son rented this box about 5 years ago," Mrs. Hayes said quietly. "He visited it quite often. Please take your time. I will be outside at my desk if you need anything." The private viewing room door closed behind her. Now it was only me and the box. I took a deep breath and opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Michael's handwriting. On the envelope, written in dark blue ink, were the words, "To my dear mom." My hands trembled as I opened it. I began to read, and tears started falling from the very first line. "My dear mom, if you are reading this letter, it means I am gone. And perhaps Tori has already shown you her true self. I am sorry for that, Mom, but I am not surprised. I have known for years what kind of person I married. I have been preparing for this possibility for a long time. You gave us $50,000 for the down payment on our house. You always treated it like a loan, even though you never once asked to be repaid. I invested that money over the past 5 years. I added more whenever I could from my salary and bonuses. The money in the attached accounts is not just repayment. It is the result of careful investment. Right now it has grown to $220,000. Everything is under your name and it can be accessed immediately with a simple procedure." I lowered the letter. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. $220,000. The number was larger than anything I had ever imagined. I looked down at the documents inside the box. Bank statements, investment summaries, account numbers. Everything was clear, legal, and all under the name Lauren Smith. I picked up the letter again and continued reading, my heart pounding. I also discovered that Tori often tells people that you never contributed anything to our family. What she does not mention is that the mortgage payments were automatically deducted from my salary account the entire time you lived with us. Any money you gave me was immediately invested for your future. I kept records of everything, Mom. Every email, every message, every careless comment she made about you. Everything is inside the folder labeled Documents. I reached for the thick folder. Inside were dozens of pieces of evidence. Screenshots of text messages Tori had sent to her sister and to Brandon, calling me a burden and an annoying old woman. Emails where she discussed plans to force me out of the house after Michael died. Credit card statements showing luxury spending, expensive spas, trips to New York with friends, designer clothes. All during the same months when Tori complained that she could not even afford groceries. But the worst discovery was a chain of emails between Tori and Brandon. They were discussing the possibility of declaring me mentally incompetent so they could gain access to my pension and Social Security benefits. My vision blurred with tears, not because of anger, but because of heartbreak for Michael. My son had lived with this truth for years, quietly documenting everything, quietly protecting his mother, without letting Tori or anyone else know. The last part of the letter made me cry out loud. You deserve far better than the way she treated you. Take this money and build a life where no one can ever make you feel unwelcome again. And Mom, please do not tell Tori anything until you are truly safe from her. Trust me on this. I love you very much. Forever. Michael. I sat in that small, windowless room for almost an hour. I read the letter again and again. I turned through every page of the documents. Each line was a quiet confirmation. Michael had never abandoned his mother. He had seen everything, every cruel word, every scheme, and he had chosen the quietest and smartest way to protect me. When I finally stepped out of the room, Mrs. Hayes looked at me with deep sympathy. She helped me place all the documents into a large envelope and explained the process for accessing the investment accounts. You simply need to bring the death certificate and your identification to the counter. Everything can be processed quickly. I held the envelope tightly and walked out into the Illinois afternoon sunlight. My phone vibrated. It was Tori. I looked at the screen. Then I silenced the call. Not yet. Michael had warned me. Do not say anything until you are safe. I sat in my car, still gripping the envelope, and whispered softly, My son, I will do exactly as you asked. And I promise you I will live well. For you. At that moment I understood something clearly. The greatest secret inside that box was not the money. It was Michael's love. A love strong enough to reach beyond death in order to protect his mother. And I also knew something else. The next time I met Tori, it would no longer be the meeting of a mother-in-law who had been thrown out of her home. After leaving the bank, I drove back to the motel in a state that was both emotional and strangely clear-minded. Michael's letter remained in my handbag like a protective charm. I read it again and again, each time I cried. But these were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of deep gratitude. My son had been quietly protecting me for years, and now, even from far away, he was still doing the same. I made a decision. I would not rush anything. I would wait for the right moment, just as Michael had warned. Do not say anything until you are safe. That afternoon, my phone vibrated. Tori's name appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. Lauren, her voice was so sweet that it sounded artificial, as if we had never argued in the kitchen. I was thinking, would you like to come over for lunch tomorrow? Just the two of us? We could talk about family matters for a bit. I will make that chicken salad you like. We have been through so much, but family is still family, right? I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting her believe I was hesitating. Then I answered gently, All right, Tori, I will come at 12 o'clock. She exhaled with clear relief, her voice suddenly cheerful. Wonderful. I will prepare everything carefully. You just get some rest. I ended the call and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had had in many days. I knew this was a sweet trap. Tori wanted information about the safety deposit box. She wanted to know what was inside, and perhaps she hoped to persuade me to share it. But this time I had something she did not expect. I opened the small motel wardrobe and chose my simple navy blue dress. Then I prepared a small gift. It was a framed photograph of Michael on the day he graduated from college. I had placed it in a simple wooden frame that I bought from a small store near the motel. It was not really a gift. It was a reminder. The next morning, I drove to the house that used to be mine. Now it was Tori's house. When she opened the door, smiling brightly in a flowing white dress, I almost laughed at the contrast. Lauren, come in. I am so happy you came. She hugged me quickly. It was a short, artificial embrace. Then she led me to the dining room. The table was arranged like a small celebration. Their white wedding china with gold trim stood neatly on the table. Fresh flowers had been cut from the garden. And there it was, my favorite chicken salad served with toasted bread and iced tea. Tori poured the tea and smiled warmly. I remember you liked chicken salad with a little walnut and homemade vinaigrette. I hope you still enjoy it. I sat down and smiled politely. That is very thoughtful, Tori. Thank you. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Only the soft sound of utensils touching plates filled the room. Tori chatted about the weather, about the neighbors, about the difficult days we had all gone through. I listened quietly and nodded. I waited for her to reach the real subject. Finally, she placed her fork down and leaned forward slightly. Her voice softened. So, I have been thinking a lot about the safety deposit box. Have you opened it yet? I know we have disagreements, but Michael would want us to support each other. Family should stay united, right? I took a sip of tea calmly. I agree. Family should stay united. Tori's eyes brightened immediately. Clearly, she thought she had found an opening. I am relieved to hear you say that. I was worried you might still be upset about having to find a new place so quickly. But you understand I needed space to grieve, she continued gently. As for whatever Michael left, I think we could work together. Combine what is in the box with the insurance money. Invest it together. I have several very good financial advisors. I placed my fork down and looked directly into her eyes. That is thoughtful, Tori, but I am curious. What makes you think there is anything valuable inside the box? She paused. Her smile stiffened slightly. Well, Michael was always very private about finances. I assume he had his reasons. I smiled lightly. Private, that is an interesting word. I think Michael told you exactly what he believed you needed to know. Something flickered in Tori's eyes. Uncertainty and a little fear. What did you find in the box? She asked. I reached into my handbag and took out the framed photograph. First, I brought you a small gift, a token of thanks. Tori opened it. Her face softened slightly when she saw Michael's graduation picture. Oh, this is beautiful. Thank you. I thought you should have it. After all, you were such a devoted wife. I emphasized the word devoted. My voice remained calm but clear. Tori looked up sharply. What do you mean by that? Nothing at all. I simply appreciate how you cared for my son. She placed the photograph down. Her attitude changed instantly. The artificial sweetness disappeared, replaced by suspicion. You are hinting at something. Just say what was in the box. I took another sip of tea. Mostly documents. Very interesting reading. What kind of documents? Her voice rose slightly. Financial records, investment statements, some letters, and quite a few printed emails and text messages. The color drained from Tori's face. Messages. Michael was very careful about keeping records, especially toward the end. Would you like to see one? This one is from about 6 months ago. I took out my phone and opened one of the screenshots Michael had saved. I turned the screen toward her. It showed a message Tori had sent to her sister. Honestly, I will be so happy when that old woman finally moves out. Then I can turn her room into the gym I have always wanted. Tori lunged forward to grab the phone, but I smoothly pulled it back. There are dozens more. The next one is particularly enlightening. You wrote to Brandon about convincing Michael that I should contribute to household costs, even though the mortgage was already being deducted from his salary. Stop, Tori whispered. And then there are emails where you laugh with your sister about how easily I could be manipulated, how to make me feel like a burden while you were already planning to throw me out after Michael died. I set the phone down and looked at her curiously. Very impressive foresight, planning to remove me while Michael was still alive. Tori's calm completely collapsed. He had no right to save private messages. Actually, he had every right. It was his house, and you were talking about his mother. I leaned back in my chair. The real question is what we should do with this situation. Tori gripped the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. What do you want? I do not want anything from you, Tori. I never did. Then why are you doing this? To humiliate me? I considered her words seriously. You are right. There would be no point in humiliating you. You have already done that quite perfectly by yourself. Tori stared at me in panic. I do not understand. You threw me out of the house the day after my son's funeral. You told me I was worthless. You said Michael only pitied me and that I had contributed nothing to your family. I stood slowly. But here is what you never understood about Michael. He saw everything. Every cruel word. Every scheme. Every lie you told. Tori trembled. You cannot prove any of that would stand in court. Court, I laughed softly, surprising even myself. Oh dear, I have no intention of taking you to court, Tori. She blinked in confusion. You do not. Why not? Because you have already given me everything I need. I removed the thick folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. Michael left me more than screenshots. He left 5 years of evidence showing exactly how you manipulated both of us. Tori stared at the folder as if it might bite her. I opened it. Bank statements showing the mortgage payments were automatically deducted from Michael's salary the entire time I lived here. Email chains between you and Brandon discussing how to handle the Lauren problem. Credit card statements showing luxury purchases. Spa visits. Trips to New York with your sister. All during the same days you told Michael you could not afford basic household groceries. Tori's breathing became shallow. He saved everything. He recorded everything. Even copies of emails you sent to friends calling him easy to control and joking about how simple it was to convince him I was a financial burden. Tori flinched as if slapped. I continued, and the most interesting part, emails between you and Brandon discussing a long-term plan to declare me mentally incompetent so you could gain access to my pension and Social Security. That is not, we never actually, Tori stammered. No, you never carried it out. Do you know why? Because Michael discovered your plan and took steps to protect me. Tori's eyes widened. What steps? I smiled gently. You thought there was nothing about me worth protecting. But according to these investment statements, it seems I do have something worth protecting. I paused. The $50,000 I gave Michael for the house, he invested it carefully for 5 years. It has now grown into $220,000. Tori's face turned pale. That cannot be. Michael was a careful investor, and he was determined to make sure his mother would be taken care of. She clutched the table again. That money is almost equal to the life insurance payout. It must belong to the estate. It has to be divided under what legal principle? Because I am his wife and you are only his mother. The phrase only his mother struck me like a blow. But instead of pain, I felt clarity. You know what, Tori, you are absolutely right. I am only his mother. The woman who gave birth to him, raised him, supported him through college, and lent him the down payment for the house where you threw me out like trash. I lifted my handbag onto my shoulder, and apparently that was enough for Michael to make sure I would never have to depend on anyone's charity again. I walked toward the door. Wait, Tori called desperately. We can work this out. Please sit down. Let us talk rationally. I paused at the doorway and turned back. What exactly do you think we need to work out? The financial situation, our relationship, everything. Her voice tightened with panic. I know I made mistakes. I was under stress after Michael's death. I was worried about money and took it out on you. But we can fix this, I spoke quietly. I am sure you are worried about money, but not for the reason you claim. What do you mean? I pulled out one last document from the folder. Michael also recorded your spending habits, including the $15,000 you charged to your credit card during the month before he died. Spa visits, designer clothes, a weekend in New York with your sister, all while telling Michael you were worried about grocery bills. Tori collapsed into her chair. You did not do what planned to live comfortably on his insurance money while discarding the inconvenient mother-in-law who might interfere with your lifestyle. Tori began to cry. Ugly tears ruined her perfect makeup. You do not understand the pressure I was under. Everyone expected me to be the perfect wife, the perfect hostess. Michael's colleagues, the neighbors, my family. Do you know how exhausting it is to maintain appearances? I looked at her, sitting there in her expensive white dress inside that beautiful house surrounded by luxury, complaining about appearances. No, Tori. I do not know. I was too busy actually taking care of my family while you were busy spending his money. I loved Michael. You loved what Michael could provide. That is not the same thing, she sobbed harder. I cannot lose everything. I cannot go back to being nobody. You are not nobody. You are Michael's widow. You inherited a $600,000 house, $250,000 in life insurance in his retirement account. You are financially secure for life if you manage it wisely. But it is not enough for the life I planned. Then perhaps you planned your life poorly. I turned again toward the door. This time she did not try to stop me with words. Instead, I heard a soft thud behind me. I turned. Tori had collapsed into her chair. Her face was gray and her breathing shallow. It was not a medical emergency. It was complete collapse. The moment when someone realizes they have lost everything they believed they deserved and that no scheme can recover it. I cannot, she whispered. I cannot lose everything. You did not lose everything, Tori. I opened the door. You only lost the things that were never truly yours. I stepped out of the house into the warm afternoon sunlight of Maplewood. For the first time in many days, I felt real freedom, not because of money, but because justice had arrived quietly but surely. Michael had kept his promise. Even from the other side of the world, my son was still taking care of his mother, and that more than any amount of money was the greatest gift he could ever give me. I walked out of that house, the house that once belonged to Michael, the house where I once believed I belonged, without turning back. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Yet that small sound echoed in my heart like the toll of a bell that marked the end of a long and painful chapter. From the dining room, I could hear Tori crying, loud, broken sobs, the kind of sobs that come when a person has completely lost control. She had collapsed over the table, surrounded by the white wedding china with the gold trim, the fresh flowers, and the untouched plate of chicken salad. Everything she had prepared to convince me now stood there like scenery for the collapse of her own carefully constructed world. I walked down the driveway under the warm afternoon sun of Maplewood. A gentle breeze moved through the bright red maple trees. It carried the smell of freshly cut grass and the soft scent of flowers from a neighbor's garden. For the first time in many months, I felt true freedom. Not because of the money in the account, not because of the safety deposit box, but because justice had arrived. Quietly, slowly, yet with complete certainty. There had been no courtroom, no arguments, no shouting, only the truth. And Michael had left behind enough truth for everything to reveal itself. I drove back to the motel one final time and packed the few belongings I still had there. The next morning, I returned to the bank and completed the process with the patient help of Mrs. Margaret Hayes. $220,000. That was the amount Michael had quietly built from the $50,000 I once gave him. Now the money was in my hands, not for revenge, not for display, only for a new beginning, just as Michael had hoped. I found a small house on the outskirts of Maplewood. It was a simple one-story home with 2 bedrooms. In the backyard stood an old oak tree and several rose bushes. It was not as grand as the old house, but it was warm, peaceful, and it felt like mine. I bought it using Michael's money. Then I decorated it with old photographs of him, of his father, and of the 3 of us together. These were the same photographs that Tori had once taken down. Every morning I sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee and watched the quiet street. And every morning I felt deeply grateful. I lived independently now, free. I no longer had to worry about being a burden to anyone. My Social Security and my teacher's pension were enough to support my simple life. The money Michael left behind became a reserve for the future, a gift from my son, a gift that meant I would never again have to rely on anyone's pity. Every evening I sat at the small dining table and looked at the photograph of Michael smiling brightly on his graduation day, and I whispered softly, "My son, you kept your promise. You are still taking care of your mother from the other side of the world, just as you said you would. That is the greatest gift you could ever give me, not money but love, protection, and the certainty that I deserve happiness." Michael was not only a wonderful son, he was proof that true love does not end even when life itself does. He saw everything. He recorded everything, not for revenge but to protect his mother. And because of that, justice came. Quiet but powerful. Sometimes karma does not need you to take action. It simply waits for the right moment. Then it reveals itself, bringing justice and healing with it. That is the lesson I learned through the greatest pain of my life. Thank you for listening to my entire story. If you have ever experienced betrayal, disrespect, or simply a moment when you felt you had no hope left, please remember this. You are not alone. Sometimes the person you love the most is still there, protecting you in ways you never expected. If you enjoyed this story, stories about karma, quiet justice, and love that continues even beyond death, please press like to support the channel. Subscribe so you will not miss the next stories. And leave a comment below to tell me where you are watching from. California with its warm sunshine, Texas with its wide open land, or perhaps a small corner somewhere in the Midwest. Your voice truly matters to me. And if you have a story of your own, happy or sad, please share it. We are all trying to make it through the hardest moments of life together. Thank you. And remember this, you deserve love, you deserve respect, and you deserve to live a life where no one can ever make you feel unwelcome. I will see you again in the next video. May your day be peaceful.